and start that now. All right, so Nikita, Oliver, I want to just thank you again for being here. I would like to say Nikita has lived in Seattle for over 17 years. This is their second run for elective office. In 2017, they ran for mayor of Seattle. They are currently executive director of Creative Justice. That's an innovative art-based restorative justice program for at-risk youth. Nikita earned degrees from Seattle Pacific University and the University of Washington. They are an attorney, adjunct professor at Seattle University School of Law, community organizer, cultural worker, and artist. Nikita, thank you again for being here, and we appreciate you kicking off our program tonight. All right, our first question. Belltown, like many Seattle neighborhoods, has public safety issues and concerns, from property crime and assaults to homelessness and theft. No matter who you talk to, and I've anecdotally, I've talked to a lot of people in town, and from small businesses to residents, and many really feel frustrated by what they describe as a lack of progress on this front. What would you do to break through this impact? How would you galvanize people, move them forward? And very specifically, how would you balance law enforcement, non-enforcement, crime prevention, social services, and urban planning, with the goal, of course, to create a better quality of life in Belltown?
Absolutely. And I just want to start by saying I love Belltown. I worked in Belltown for a while, would travel from Rainier Beach on the light rail to Westlake and walk from Westlake to 7th, where I worked at Europe. So, have a context for the Belltown neighborhood and how walkable it is, and that it is becoming emblematic of the type of 15-minute walk city that we want to see. I believe we need to use strategies that we know are working when it comes to supporting, especially our relatives who are living outside. I want to see proactive, preventative response strategies like the ones we have in the U District, corner greeters in the Rainier Beach neighborhood, and community-based collaborations that have made spaces like the Safeway parking lot in Rainier Beach much safer. In the U District, they're utilizing a model where you have an on-the-ground case manager who the neighborhood knows, the businesses know, and that case manager, David Delgado, is able to respond when folks are in crisis. Businesses call him to come and support many of our neighbors who are experiencing crisis, and do so in a way that de-escalates and then gets them connected to long-term services. In the Rainier Beach neighborhood, Corner Greeters receives data from the Seattle Police Department about where there are hotspots, and young people set up projects for beautification. They do tabling, they meet with the local businesses to build relationship. And we've actually found that in those hotspots, crime has decreased and people's feelings of positivity in the neighborhood actually increase. And in the Safeway parking lot in Rainier Beach, where we saw an increase in uptick in violence over the summer, collaborations between Be Safe Bros, Corner Greeters, community passageways, they set up tabling and supports at the times when we knew we were most likely to see a violent occurrence. And guess what? Those violent occurrences decreased. So engaging and increasing those programs in neighborhoods like Belltown, including LEAD and REACH, are opportunities to not just simply respond to crisis, but do so through a public health lens. We also know that our True Blood population, these are folks that outreach teams have identified as having the most high acuity, they need the most intensive case management, and they're also the most marginalized of our residents who are living outside. They tend to have high instances of behavioral health needs, and they may even be marginalized by other unhoused communities. Providing this on-the-ground case management that both businesses and community members know they can access to support people actually increases the likelihood that folks in this population will get the services that they need. I would add to that, really developing a strong collaboration with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, so we can be responding both to the upstream and downstream causes of homelessness, as well as the things that occur that may make our neighborhoods feel less safe. But those are not the only things that we can do. Activating spaces through free ride zones, lighting and space changes, neighborhood ambassadors like the Be Safe Bros program, and requirements for green spaces, parks, and setbacks for new developers are all ways to really build out community strength and capacity, and build a system that isn't just solely reliant upon officers with a gun and a badge, but simultaneously, as I said with the Corner Greeters program, utilize the data that we have received from law enforcement to ensure that our response is actually aligned with the need. So just like the Belltown neighborhood, I'm interested in safety and walkable spaces and want to do so through a public health lens that ensures that everyone has what they need to thrive.
Not fast enough on the mute button. Sorry about that. So you mentioned that data. Why don't you drill down on that for us? I want to make sure people that are watching understand what came back with regard to the number of 911 calls and what we learned from that, and what you want to take, how that informed you, I guess is the best way to put that.
Absolutely. So in 2021, the National Institute for Criminal Justice Reform, which specializes in reducing incarceration and gun violence, released an analysis of 3 years of 911 dispatch data from the Seattle Police Department. And according to the Institute, up to half of the calls Seattle police receive can be responded to without an armed sworn officer. The Institute also found that 80% of calls are non-criminal responses, and in the future, it would be appropriate for up to 49% of calls to receive an alternative non-sworn dispatch. Through 911 dispatch being civilianized in the Community Safety and Communications Center, and the council this last year investing $13 million in scaling up our community-based responses, we are making significant strides to building out a multiplicity of responses that meet people at their immediate, whatever their immediate crisis is, in a way that de-escalates that situation and then gets them connected to long-term care. And so really these plans are based in the data that we know is happening when folks are reaching out for support, and it's based on what we know works. David Delgado took me through the U District and showed me the businesses who call him when they need support, introduced me to some of the residents there that he's gotten to know and understands their needs, and then even connected me to some of the case managers that do the long-term care of helping people get their license, of helping people get stabilized, of ensuring that people receive behavioral health supports. These are actually these are strategies that are rooted in data and also rooted in best practices for serving our community members.
Nikita, thank you for that. You know, everything costs money. Let's shift over to focus. We have 2 minutes for this next question and answer. With a budget of over $8 billion, Seattle's spending per resident is among the very highest in the country at roughly $8,500 per resident. For comparison's sake, Boston, a similar city population size, has a budget of about $3.6 billion and roughly $5,300 spending per resident. Why is Seattle, in your opinion, one of the leaders in spending per resident, yet seemingly unable to solve the large issues it's facing?
Well, a few things. I think it's important, one, to acknowledge that the cost of living in Seattle is incredibly high, and that often we're spending a lot of our dollars on responding to symptoms of crisis rather than actually responding to the root causes. We know that the housing affordability and homelessness crisis is deeply impacted and driven by the cost of housing. It is very much an economic crisis, even though there are behavioral health components. Addressing that economic end is going to be key. So providing more cash assistance for folks, acquisition, preservation, building deeply affordable housing are all really important strategies that we honestly have not invested enough in. We know that in our region, we have a huge racial wealth gap that's also connected to that housing affordability crisis. It's connected to redlining and exclusionary zoning. And our failure to respond to those root causes has us spending much more on the symptoms of the crisis rather than working our way out of it. And I think it's also important to know that many of our services are centralized. They can often be high barrier, and many of our case managers, their caseloads are high, but their wages are low. And so we're not effectively transitioning people from one service to the next, or say from bridge supportive housing into permanent housing, because we haven't fully built out the system in a way that it's coordinated. It identifies who needs those services and makes sure that those services are really aligned for what people need. And so this is why the King County Regional Homelessness Authority is going to be really important, and building a strategy that works both at the downstream point and the upstream point. And the Seattle City Council is going to retain the responsibility to build those upstream solutions around housing acquisition, preservation, and building, cash assistance, and continuing to put in place renters protections. And I would say, part of this is us moving out of our regressive tax structure into a progressive way of generating revenue for our city, so that it's not built on the backs of those who have the least. The poorest in our city pay almost 17% in taxes, while the wealthiest pay somewhere somewhere between 1% to 3%. And that means that our dollars just simply do not go as far because we're taxing people who are accessing those dollars for support, literally to fund those supports. So we have a lot of system changes to make, a lot of policies to address root causes, and to really get coordinated on our responses so that they are deeply effective and targeted at where they need to be going.
Let me just follow up. You mentioned RHA, the Regional Housing Authority. We know Jumpstart money is coming to the city next year. How would you lend oversight to the RHA?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jumpstart and the King County Regional Homelessness Authority are somewhat attached, but not fully. So the King County Regional Homelessness Authority is going to be subsuming all of our contracts come January 1, 2022. And then during 2022, we'll be putting out a request for a proposal for folks to be able to actually reapply for their contracts. And in January 1, 2023, we'll completely reissue. So we're going to see some significant changes to the Seattle City approach to that, and the amount of money that's going into our regional approach. Now, we also know, based on the McKinsey study, that we need about $400 million per year for the next 10 years to get out of this crisis. So even if we use the full 200 million plus of Jumpstart that is being generated, we're still not responding with resources that are adequate with the crisis as we respond to the housing affordability and homelessness crisis. So this is where either increasing Jumpstart or using one of the other progressive revenue generating options that our task force has already identified will be key to effectively getting ourselves to where we need to be in the next 10 years.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit, but in that same line of thinking with regard to economically, Seattle's downtown has taken a real hit during the pandemic, as we all know. The Downtown Seattle Association at one point found 268 street level businesses closed since the start of 2020. Visit Seattle found hotel revenue was down over 90%. More recently, there have definitely been some encouraging signs here. SeaTac travel is up roughly 2/3 of pre-pandemic levels. And the Seattle room occupancy rate is up dramatically. In 2 minutes, where do you think that Seattle is in its recovery, and what are the first steps that you would take?
To be honest, I actually worry that we haven't hit the deepest part of the crisis. We know there were last count about 60,000 residents who are at least a month behind on paying their rent. So when the eviction moratorium is up on January 1, we could very much have an even serious wave of crisis on our hands, especially given the housing affordability and homelessness crisis we already have. So I think the city really leveraging Seattle Rescue Plan dollars, as well as the infrastructure dollars that will be coming down from the federal government to specifically bail out and support renters as we think about both infrastructure, affordable housing, treating it as infrastructure, childcare, treating it as infrastructure, are going to be really key to addressing the crises that I think are actually in front of us. So while I think many of us feel like we are in a lull of the recession, the pandemic, and maybe we're getting ready to hit our stride of improving, I actually think that if we don't make significant changes right now, come January of next year, we're going to see an even worse tide in front of us. That's why the tenants' rights that have been put in place to the current Seattle City Council, I think, are significant, as well as keeping in place commercial rent control to ensure that businesses that have a brick and mortar can maintain an affordable place, an affordable storefront, so they don't lose those spaces, because there are workers still in downtown. And as you stated about Belltown, Belltown is not just a place where people work, it is a place where people live. So ensuring that storefronts can get fast tracks on permits to continue to keep outdoor spaces for eating and protecting folks staying in those spaces is going to be really key to having a thriving downtown as we move forward.
So for years, leaders have talked about zoning changes to increase density strategically, including on the transit corridors and neighborhood business centers. For over 25 years, Belltown has grown as the city's most dense neighborhood, with additional services that are needed to support that kind of, what additional services are needed to support that kind density in Belltown, as well as other neighborhoods.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm not sure what was going on with you, but your question got really chopped up by whoever hopped on the Zoom.
Well, let me rephrase it for you. I apologize. For years, leaders have talked about the zoning changes. The question is, for over 25 years, Belltown, as we mentioned, has really grown. It is the most dense neighborhood in the city. What are the additional services that we need in Belltown and other neighborhoods of the city like that in order to support that density? And what will you do about it?
Yeah, so one of the major things that we need to be thinking about is childcare. People should not have to travel outside of their neighborhood to have an affordable, safe place for their children to go. And in fact, childcare is probably one of the most expensive things in our city. So really thinking about a 3-point plan for that is building childcare facilities in every neighborhood. And luckily the city council already made some significant zoning changes to make that possible. Finding ways to continue through our funding and thinking of childcare as infrastructure. So as the federal infrastructure dollars come down, actually prioritizing more to build that out as a way of ensuring that we have affordable childcare near where people live. And then also supporting our childcare workers. They have played a significant role in this crisis. So whether that's around portable benefits or unionization of childcare workers, or ensuring that they can live close to where they're serving our communities. And I think Belltown is an example of that, having 0 to 30% AMI and workforce housing. Belltown is actually a really viable place to have more childcare centers and opportunities. There also aren't necessarily enough Seattle Public Schools and opportunities in the downtown corridor, including in Belltown. There are plans working on having a school in that space. Again, this is so that families don't have to travel as far, that they have the amenities they need, the services they need right where they are at. This is also a part of addressing the climate catastrophe. If people can walk to school, walk to childcare, walk to services, walk to grocery stores, we're decreasing the amount of time that people spend in their cars and increasing the multimodal opportunities. And so that also leads me to Vision Zero, ensuring that we are doing everything that we can to have bike lanes, have our pedestrian master plan in place, and aligning that with our 2024 comprehensive plan will be key to ensuring that our children, our families, our elders can move safely through areas like Belltown.
Nikita, we've got about 1 more minute left for you here, and I'd love you to answer this as quickly as you can. What do you see as the critical votable differences between your platform and your promises and your vision of Seattle compared to your opponent?
I think Sarah and I come at things from a very different perspective. I am a renter. I am a worker, and I, as a nonprofit executive director, attorney, and a case manager, have been working on the front lines of the crises that have been facing our city for a very long time. I know the ways in which policy is or is not unfolding in a useful way on the front lines of those crises. And I'm deeply connected to our most marginalized and vulnerable Seattleites. And I believe that those who have proximity to the pain should also have proximity to power to be able to dictate how those material conditions that they're living in will change. I can bring that plus a very broad coalition of support from Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, King County Councilman Girmay Zahalai, to state representatives like Kirsten Harris-Talley and Senator Rebecca Saldana, to be able to respond to the need for progressive revenue generation, transportation for all, and housing for all, building a city where we can really thrive and have safety through a public health lens.
We'll leave it there. Nikita Oliver, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate all of your input tonight.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. All right, we are going to bring in Sarah Nelson next. And just reminding everybody that we are recording. Sarah Nelson has lived in Seattle for over 30 years. She is Nikita's opponent in this race. This is her second run for elective office. In 2017. She ran for city council. She taught at the University of Washington for 10 years, and she did work as a legislative aide at the Seattle City Council for Richard Conlon, the councilman at the time. Since 2009, she, with her husband, are the owners of Fremont Brewing. Sarah holds degrees from the University of California, the University of Washington as well. She is married and she has 2 teenagers. Tonight, we welcome Sarah Nelson. Hello, Sarah. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I have one correction. I did not teach at UW for 10 years. It took me 7 to get my PhD, and I taught for a couple years after that.
All right, thank you for that correction. We appreciate that. We'll get right into the first question. We're just reminding folks that we're going to try to keep everybody on a time limit here. So about 5 minutes for this answer. Belltown, it's the same question. We're giving all the candidates, for those who are joining us or just joining us, thank you for being here with us. All the candidates are getting the same questions, and loving to hear or appreciating their input tonight. So back to question number 1. Belltown, like many Seattle neighborhoods, Sarah, has public safety issues and concerns, from property crime and assaults to homelessness and theft. And a lot of folks in the area, whether they live here, visit here, or work here seem to be very frustrated by the lack of progress on this front. We want to know how you would break through the impasse, how you would galvanize people to move forward with regard to law enforcement and crime prevention, as well as social services and urban planning. Sarah?
You got me with galvanize, because I think the best way to galvanize people is to show that there is hope for change. And clearly this city council's policies have not worked, especially for our most vulnerable. And I believe that my opponent offers more of the same. So we need to change. We need to address all the issues that you talked about. And I tell you, I read the neighborhood survey and the recovery plan, every single one of those comments, and the frustration and the anger was almost palpable in those comments. And here's the problem. Council has no plan for homelessness. They haven't for years, despite the millions of dollars that have been spent year after year. And so, so that is leading to just a sort of a throw up our hands. What are we going to do? Yes, thank goodness the Regional Homelessness Authority will be taking over with a region-wide plan, and its implementation plan is going to include things I've been calling for a long time: an army of peer navigators who've experienced homelessness themselves, that are outreaching to encampment dwellers and offering them housing options that are available right now. And there needs to be coordination amongst service providers so we can provide continuity of care. This is not rocket science, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. These are best practices that other cities have been employing for years to reduce their population of chronically homeless. We have got to do that. But people who say no sweeps, sweeps are inhumane. I mean, and I think that encampments are inhumane. Sounds like they are waiting for $400 million to provide all of these housing units that we need. I say we need to target areas of the city that have lots of encampments, starting with downtown and Belltown, and flood them with resources to get people out of tents and into homes. And we have to fund mental health and addiction services, because that is driving and following homelessness. And as someone in recovery, I know that it's not a great thing to just ignore people who are living in areas where there are lots of drugs and alcohol available, if they've got a vulnerability to addiction. So we need to start all over. Thank goodness we'll have some help from the county, but we need to fund addiction and mental health services directly, Seattle, with perhaps the Jumpstart funds that will come in. And we need to restore our public spaces. Period. That is hurting residents, and it's hurting your businesses, and it's hurting the people that are living in encampments. That's my line on homelessness. And then the second problem is that we've got a city council that has turned a blind eye to crime. And they tried to pass legislation to legalize misdemeanors. What's with that? Those aren't small crimes. Early on in my campaign, I talked to, I think it was the general manager of Jack Straw, the day after someone just walked off with a whole bunch of clothes. That happens over and over again every day. And when it's repeated, it's not small when it's happening to you. So we need to get serious about crime. And we need to not defund the police. This council committed to a 50% defund before having a plan in place to keep people safe. They walked that back. But my opponent wants to defund the police by 50% and eventually abolish the police. And they're using the math that says, this report says that 50% of the calls don't require a police response. So let's cut the police by 50%. That's way too simplistic, because there are detectives and people that need to be doing their work, and just cutting it will take away that labor. We're not just talking about patrol officers here. We're talking about the people that are investigating gun violence. And no detectives, how are we going to know how those guns are getting on the street if everybody says we need to get guns off the street? So what I say in answer to your question is that homelessness and public safety are two key issues. And we need a plan, and we need to make sure that our police force is staffed adequately. The weekend in July, After there were those 4 shootings, and one of them was near Ohana, I issued a call to action. And one of the things that I said was adequately staff SPDs so that when there are high response calls, like a shooting or multiple, there are enough officers to still respond to the life-threatening calls, or somebody breaking into the home of someone in West Seattle or Ballard or something like that. And, I could go on and on. 3
Well,
former
Sarah,
police
you
chiefs.
mentioned that with regard to homelessness, that working with compassion, being respectful to people, but having the parks and the streets returned to as they were. Where do these people go when on average, there's only maybe a few shelter beds a night? What do you do? How do you do that?
Well, first of all, we choose what San Francisco is doing is they choose a geographic area, and they have a real-time list of all the units that are available right now, from high acuity, so lots and lots of services, to low acuity. And they have people who are doing repeated outreach. And so we start small. And we identified the units that are available right now. And Mark Dones presented a slide pack the other day, and basically says that there are, we have to have 900 units in downtown. There are about 900 people that are living on the streets of downtown. Let's start there. And you start by developing a by name list of those individuals and the people and the services that they need, and then offer it and get them into housing. It's pure and simple, but we have to be able to start with a plan and with a policy and get the work done. And right now, there maybe Reach has, I don't know how many outreach people, the Hope team that replaced the NAB teams. I think there are 5 employees in that team. I could be wrong, 7, I don't know. That is not enough to get this work done.
We want to ask you about, thank you, about the budget in Seattle and the amount of money that's spent on each resident, and the fact that it just doesn't seem as though that money is really solving those large issues that we're facing. So why is that, in your opinion? Have you studied that? What do you think is happening there, and what would you do about it?
Well, I have never heard that figure from Boston, but it does reinforce that this is not simply a function of macroeconomics. It's not just about, the cost of living is expensive in Seattle. No, we've got a leadership problem. Public confidence in city government is at an all-time low because the city council hasn't shown that they can spend money wisely. Our bridges are falling down. Our parks are full of trash, etc. And so, one of the big questions on the campaign trail this year is, what new source of progressive revenue will you support? And to that I say, before we talk about new revenue, I need to see results. And I need to see that, first of all, basic services are adequately funded. And we can't be robbing the general fund for pet projects every time. We have to make sure that local government is doing its main job first, basic services, and then go from there. So I think that we've got a leadership problem at City Council. I think that we've got this idea that we just need more money but when will it ever be enough?
I'm curious, what department do you think is offering satellites the most value, and maybe which are offering the least?
The fire department. The fire department is a first responder. Too often when we talk about public safety, the fire department, is forgotten. But they're on the front lines, and they're responsible for, obviously, putting out fires and sending someone to your door if your mother-in-law is having a heart attack, like mine. And so, and this is an example of a basic service that has been neglected because the staffing in the fire department has been static for about 10 years, despite the fact that Seattle has grown a lot in that amount of time. And we have added calls that they're responding to in encampments, putting out fires at 7 Gables around the corner from my house on Christmas Eve. And then COVID came. and they were manning the testing and the vaccination sites. They don't have enough money to replace their bunk suits, which are those outfits they wear into fires. And so that's an example of a department that is offering high value, but doesn't get the support it needs. And I'm
Thank you.
endorsed by the Seattle firefighters, I should add. Sorry.
No worries. Economically, Seattle's downtown has taken a huge hit, like cities all across the country. What are the first steps that you would take if you were elected to accelerate its recovery?
Well, I received the Downtown Seattle Association's highest score because I actually have a plan that that explains some of my steps. But basically, I'll first say that DSA also has an implementation. It has a strategic plan, but that is something that Seattle should be doing. That is city government to take care of the engine of our regional economy. And we've got a council president who didn't fill out DSA's questionnaire. And we have a council that reduced what the mayor sent down to help downtown by $4 million because DSA is doing that. We have got to have a plan for downtown. Mine includes business recruitment, sort of like what the Alliance for Pioneer Square did. Karen True went out and she courted businesses to come down to Pioneer Square and locate there. That's what we need to do. It takes effort to get businesses to come back downtown or to locate here. And that's an investment that's well worth it. And we need I propose land use changes that would allow for flexibility for ground floor residential, kind of like Belltown has. The Stoop model in Vancouver works really well. We've got a lot of empty retail space, and we could allow for residential. That would allow for more affordable apartments for families, cheaper than the ones up in the towers, and it would add life to the street. Fixing our permitting system. It takes a lot of time to renovate a building or a space or change a downtown, a ground floor retail space, excuse me. And we need flexibility in the building code to allow for smaller businesses to locate downtown and grow or move as they get bigger. So the list is long, but my point is we've got to be strategic and intentional and deliberate to bring downtown back.
Thank you. Let's talk again about Belltown and the density and it being the densest city neighborhood. What services does Belltown need? What supportive services would you bring to Belltown and other neighborhoods? Because let's face it, every neighborhood that can is going to be dealing with density issues, and very often the only place to go is also up throughout the city. So let's talk a little bit about the supportive services that you think are needed in order to improve that quality of life we were talking about earlier.
Okay, I think when you're talking about supportive services, you're talking about what some people call amenities. But I call basics for a livable city, and that is open space. And I also read the document where people weighed in on what they want to see at Battery Street Portal. Is it going to be a school? Is it going to be open space? But what people want is activated space, more of it, so that people can enjoy and maybe perform in, or maybe have a bunch of kids running around, but more of that. And so we also have to restore the open spaces that Belltown already has. But, I really like what went on Vine Street. That was fabulous. That kind of creativity could be replicated on other streets. That adds life, it adds art, it adds whimsy and interestingness to Vine Street. Let's do more of that. Let's allow for more outdoor music and arts venues, more sculpture. Just the point is that this used to be it used to be called Film Row, 2nd Avenue, right? And that's because a lot of people came to recreate there. Let's bring that life back. So open space and more art and experimental architecture. But most of all, we need a city that cares about the basics, public safety, and restoring our open spaces and responding to the needs of people that are living here. You've got some very low income housing, and you've got some low income housing that goes up to about 60 to 80%. What do those folks need? What kind of services can we co-locate closer so that people can access them better? And I think that when people come together, they can have a vision that works, that most people want all of these things in one place. And Belltown is a neighborhood. It's not just where you park if you want to go to Pike Place Market in the summer. It's where, as you said, about 20,000 people live. And so let's treat it that way and listen to folks and then just do that.
You know, you have a lot of ideas, and I think that our participants appreciate hearing from all of the candidates. But there are obviously going to be many differing opinions, and there are situations of discord on the council, I suspect, but decisions still must be made and action still must be taken. So describe how you would lead and maybe what your management style is like.
Well, every candidate will say, I'm a coalition builder. But seriously, I believe that I can get to 5. And that's what you need to win, and preferably better, because I think that it starts with shifting the conversation, changing the conversation, broadening the spectrum of options that are presented. It starts with asking hard questions in committee meetings to basically diversify voices and say, well, you know, for example, I don't know, I'm not going to go down that road. So I can bring my colleagues along by working with them, you know, one-on-one, but also making sure that that the public's getting a role to play in input, and that means slowing legislation down. Too often, this council rams legislation through without adequate input from stakeholders and the public. In fact, they'll talk about a piece of legislation on Monday morning briefings that's going to be up for a vote, and it's clear that they really haven't thought about the details. And that's what I learned in Richard Conlin's office, was that details matter and that public voice matters. And so I'm optimistic that that I can work with my colleagues and that we can come together on things that matter most to Seattleites.
Sarah Nelson, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. We appreciate you joining us tonight and being a part of this conversation with the candidates. Thank you. All right, let's bring in our next candidate. And we'd like to invite Lorena Gonzalez. Lorena grew up in Central Washington in a migrant farm working family. She's lived in Seattle since 2002. Of course, she is running for mayor since 2015. She's been elected twice to Seattle City Council and is currently the Seattle City Council president. Prior to her election, she was practicing as a civil rights attorney. She earned a business degree from Washington State University and a law degree from Seattle University. She is married and the mother of a daughter. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. And I'm looking, and maybe we have lost Councilmember Gonzalez. I think what we'll do is, let's see if Bruce Harrell is in the house, and we will go to Bruce next. Let's see. I'm looking to my partners here, Valerie and John. How are we doing?
Lorena's just joined, Michelle. I think she's just walked in.
Fantastic. There she is. Lorena Gonzalez, thank you. You just missed your introduction, but I just introduced you. So thank you for joining us. We appreciate you being here. And we're going to launch right in. And I'll just tell you, since you're just joining us, that we are recording this. And again, thank you for being here. We're somewhat Belltown centric tonight, but of course, a lot of these questions pertain to the entire city. And our first question, we've got 5 minutes for you. And we'd like to ask, as you know, Belltown, like many Seattle neighborhoods, has some public safety issues. concerns about property crime, homelessness. It's stuff that you've heard on the city council, robberies, thefts, and it just feels as though there's a lack of progress on a lot of these fronts. We want you to weigh in on how you're going to break through that impasse, and basically, how you would galvanize people to move forward with regard to law enforcement, crime and prevention, social services and urban planning with regard to creating a better quality of life in Belltown.
Well, thanks, Michelle, and thanks to, thanks to the organizers for this evening. It's good to be here with all of you. I see some familiar faces, so good, or at least tiles. Good to see your tiles here. So, I think the underlying, sort of point of your question is, do we think we can do more to keep our community safe? And obviously, I think the answer is yes. And that's, part and parcel of the reason why I decided to run for mayor. That the mayor, frankly, is in a better position to produce strong outcomes related to public safety. That I think it's really important. The framing of your question is one that is very broad, right? It's about creating livable, walkable neighborhoods with good lighting, good garbage service, good sidewalks, and all of those things in the built environment that we know if we have put in place, it will create not just a perception of increased safety, but will actually produce more community safety. So, just a month or so ago, I had an opportunity to be at an event with some supporters in Belltown, and one of the things that they were talking about is like, look, Belltown is a neighborhood that has a lot of families, and we are also a very compassionate neighborhood that believes in density and wants more affordable housing. But we also want the things that actually make neighborhoods safe, like responsible policing, but also making sure that we're taking care of those who are unhoused and whose mental health needs are not currently being met. And also green space. Like, how do we create opportunities for families and others to recreate within Belltown as people who live in sort of a highly dense urban neighborhood. So I think there's a lot of different components related to the built environment and how we service Belltown that can really create improvements. And the other thing that I'm really interested in continuing to promote is these trauma-informed harm reduction approaches that in many cases Belltown birthed. I used to work at Casa Latina right there in Belltown on 3rd and Blanchard. And I've also worked really closely with the, originators of LEAD. Again, these are all programs that really took creative, innovative approaches to addressing the root causes of many of the public safety issues that are present in Belltown and in other neighborhoods across the city, sort of unmet substance use disorder treatment issues, for example, mental health issues. And I think the next mayor has an important role to play in advocating for additional resources for investment in those areas, and for us to do that in a regional way so that we are actually addressing the unmet needs of folks instead of what the status quo is currently, which is allowing people to continue to have crisis episodes on our streets. So, and then the last thing I'll end on here is that, threading the needle between responsible constitutional policing and sort of the reimagining of public safety is critically important to me. And as a civil rights attorney, I understand the importance of making sure that we're centering people's life and liberty first and foremost, while also making sure that we have a police department that is going to be, held to the highest accountability standards moving forward, so that we are doing both, providing responsible constitutional policing and law enforcement services, while also preserving and protecting the life and liberty of constituents who might come into interaction with law enforcement.
Yeah, thank you for that. I just wanted to mention that if you are listening, just make sure to mute your microphone so that we can hear the candidates. I did want to ask you, Lorena, about homelessness in the city. And, I'm not the first person to say it, and I've heard it from many people that, this was declared a crisis nearly 6 years ago, and it's still a crisis. And, and it's on your watch. So, your response to that.
Well, I think people in Seattle know that the issues related to homelessness are highly intersectional and systemic. And so I don't think that there's one individual to blame. I think that it is the product of a lot of systemic failures throughout a long period of time that have resulted in cities like Seattle being held, being left sort of holding the pieces together as best we can in the face of significant reduction of funding from the federal government and the state government for mental health and behavioral health issues, while also, seeing how significantly income inequality and inequality generally has grown throughout our city. I mean, everybody who lives in Seattle knows how expensive it is to live in this city. And for those of us who have a reliable job, who have a profession, who have a career that pays a living wage, it's a little bit easier to weather the storm of the increased costs of living, including the higher rent, the higher property taxes, the higher mortgages that all of us are bearing the burden of. And so I think, the next mayor has to have a fundamental understanding of those conflating systemic issues that are contributing to the inability to continue to prevent additional homelessness and to get to functional zero homelessness in the first place. And so my plan to address homelessness really does focus on addressing the needs of those who are currently living in tents and RVs and cars, specifically in public spaces. None of our public spaces are intended for living. I want to be really clear about that. And I hear constantly concerns from people about, can we prioritize, making sure that we are providing services and offering shelter and transitioning people from our parks and our places that are intended for recreating as sort of a first priority. And so that's where we will be focusing our effort, is working together with human service providers in the shelter services area, and also housing providers and behavioral health workers to create those individualized plans that will need to be in place to offer people immediately a place that they can come inside. And we can have really measurable impact here by utilizing the executive powers that you referenced in your question related to the civil emergency, by utilizing every publicly available land, all of our surplus land, and any other public-private partnership we can find to immediately stand up interventions that we know unhoused people will say yes to. Things like tiny villages, for example, that we know people will say yes to if it's offered. And we know that there is capacity amongst the tiny village providers to stand up those options to immediately begin to transition people from tents and parks to our to more appropriate and safe places, both for them and for all of us.
So zero functional homelessness, what can you define what that is, and perhaps what the timeline is? What's your vision?
No mayor is going to be able to solve homelessness and get us to zero people living and suffering outside overnight. And so this is going to be work that will require the next mayor to have a steady but urgent approach here. And so for me, that means being able to show meaningful progress in the first 100 days of my administration. And I think that meaningful progress to me means that we are seeing more more shelter being stood up, things like tiny villages and non-congregate shelter options, including hotels and motels with wraparound services, and less people living in tents in our parks and in our rights of way, because those individuals will have been transitioned, again, consistent with our social work standards, to those safer, more appropriate places throughout the city. So, functional zero homelessness really is the concept around, it's basically a milestone that tells us, look, we have effectively ended homelessness in our city, with the understanding that that doesn't mean that not a single person is experiencing housing instability, but it does mean that we have made, again, meaningful progress in rapidly housing people throughout our community.
So Seattle's budget spending, I should say, per residence is among the very highest of American cities, roughly $8,500 per resident. Why is Seattle one of the leaders in spending, and yet it seems like we're still not able to solve the problem? It seems like a lot of money. Are we just not good stewards of the money? Do we need to be spending it better? Are we spending it in the wrong places?
I think there's a difference between budgeting for solutions and spending the money. And I think what we have seen in the past is that there has been a lot of efforts, good efforts, to create additional resources and budget more dollars to spend on homelessness interventions, including affordable housing, that we know will work to bring people inside. And I think, the reality is that a mayor is not required to spend exactly how those dollars are budgeted. And so it's important for the next mayor to urgently and quickly implement and operationalize the millions of dollars that are available to her to stand up these interventions and these shelter options that I'm describing, and also fund the deep community outreach and engagement that is needed to create that relationship that needs to exist so that the person we're offering services to knows that the offer is real and is trusting the offer, and having a higher willingness to accept the offer in the first place. So we know what works in this space. In fact, there's a study that just came out at the city that evaluated why people might be, not being housed as quickly by our outreach teams. And it came down to one thing. And that one thing is, we don't have any shelter to offer people that suits their specific needs.
Thank you for that. Economically, no surprise here, Seattle's downtown has taken a huge hit. The pandemic has not been good to us, certainly from an economic standpoint. Let's talk a little bit about recovery, a plan for recovery, and more specifically, maybe what kinds of public-private alliances do you see, and like, how prepared are you to build them, and how would you build them?
Yeah, I really like this question. I think
Karen Sutherland's on there.
The city of Seattle does have some good examples of past public-private partnerships that I'd be interested in building on. So Westlake Park, for example, is a good example of a public-private partnership where the city actually owns Westlake Park, but leases the programming and the activation out to the Downtown Seattle Association. Since that has occurred, we have seen a lot more positive use of that public space that, before, when the city was just managing it, it was really challenging to find that good public use. I think the same is true for Occidental Park, where we saw a lot of really positive activation that really led to a lot more positive behavior and public use of that space. So it was also mixed use. So there were people who were experiencing homelessness who were using those parks, but also plenty of workers and tourists and visitors. And so I think, thinking really creatively about how to partner with private folks around how do we create those built environments and those activations where it makes sense is really an area of interest for me. And then the next thing I'll say is that we know that many downtown workers are office workers, and they're the primary volume of foot traffic for lunch, for going to happy hour, for dinners after work, and for business meetings. And so we also know that many surveys have told us that those workers, most of them are not interested in returning to work in an office full-time like it was pre-pandemic. And so I think there's an opportunity for the next mayor to have conversations with property managers and real estate owners around how do we reinvent the street level use of underutilized space that will likely not be used at the 100% level it was pre-pandemic because of how office work has changed in the face of the pandemic. And that's another, I think, opportunity for us to find some public-private partnership around creating space for affordable childcare, for micro businesses, and creating more commercial affordable space and incubators throughout our neighborhoods in downtown. And in turn, creating that positive use and encouraging, giving people a reason to come back to downtown.
Kind of answered this, and it segues into my next question. I just want to know if you would commit to meeting quarterly if you were elected as mayor with local business leaders in Seattle's neighborhoods, such as Belltown, to discuss timely issues and, most importantly, to agree to actionable activities.
Yeah, I mean, I always appreciate an opportunity to get together with constituents, and a lot of times folks come to see us when it's budget time here on the city council, but would really welcome an opportunity to continue to have connectivity with our small business community and others to talk about their priorities, of course.
It's been good chatting with all the candidates. I want to leave you with this one last question. What do you see as the critical votable differences between your platforms and your promises and your vision of Seattle compared to your opponent?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. So, I think that the key difference is that I am coming to this race as somebody with a very strong working class background. And I'm running for mayor because I understand that working families, people who are struggling to pay the rent or pay the mortgage, need a mayor who's going to center their interest first and foremost at City Hall. And I think that's why I am Labor's chosen candidate. Thousands of essential workers, including behavioral healthcare workers, nurses, healthcare providers, grocery store workers, childcare workers, they have thrown their full support behind our campaign because they know I want to fight for a city where working people have an opportunity to work here and live here and raise a family here and thrive. And I think that's in stark contrast to my opponent, who's being primarily supported by large, wealthy, luxury real estate developers who have played a significant role in gentrifying and displacing many of our communities and creating greater income disparities throughout our city that have made it too hard for our working people to continue to have a home and a place to exist here in the city of Seattle. So I hope you all will consider my platform, and I hope to be able to earn your support.
Lorena Gonzalez, thank you very much. And I did want to mention that, I've checked out all the websites for all the candidates. They're all very thorough. They're all very interesting. I encourage everybody, when you're making your decisions, to go and visit everyone's websites. We're going to bring in Lorena Gonzalez's opponent, Bruce Harrell. Bruce, thank you for being here.
Thanks, everybody.
I joined just in time to hear my name mentioned.
You did indeed.
In an unflattering way, I might add.
Perfect timing. Let me just do a quick intro here for everyone. I have a feeling that folks know who all our candidates are because our participants are so well educated. But let me say this. Bruce grew up in the central area of Seattle with his Black father and Japanese mother. This is his first run for mayor. However, he was a member of the Seattle Council from 2007 to 2019. While a city council member, he served as city council president and interim mayor. Bruce earned a law degree from the University of Washington. He's currently an attorney in a private practice. He is married with 3 adult children and 1 grandchild. Bruce Harrell, welcome to the program and the conversation.
Thank you, Michelle. I do need to correct one thing you said, if I may.
Oh, yes.
I did run for mayor in 2013, and that was the race that Mayor Murray won.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. Okay.
I wouldn't want anyone to think that I've won every race that I've run.
Appreciate that. I'll just remind everybody that we are recording, and I apologize for that.
No problem.
Belltown, like many Seattle neighborhoods, Bruce has a public safety issue and concerns, ranging for everything from property crimes to homelessness, crime, theft. And it seems like really, on the street when I'm meeting with people, I mean, the one thing I hear all the time that keeps bubbling to the surface is property crime. We hear a lot about Seattle police being understaffed and these increased response times, and just a real perhaps lack of progress, on this front. We want to know how you would break through that impasse, how you galvanize people, move them forward, and really balance in terms of trying to create that better quality of life in Belltown, balance law enforcement, non-enforcement, and crime prevention, along with social services and urban planning. It's a lot.
No, and that's a great question, Michelle. And quite candidly, when I announced my candidacy 8 months ago, I had police officers at my kickoff, and I said I wasn't defunding the police, that this should not be a divisive conversation, that having effective police with 7-minute response times, capable of doing thorough investigations and responding to not only crimes in progress, but following up on property crimes, that all communities want this. Black, white, yellow, brown, red, or any combination thereof, poor, rich, everything in between, that they want their children safe. They want to feel safe themselves. Employers want it. And while my opponent seems to spend an inordinate amount of time criticizing those who support me, perhaps it is just because they want what I want, which is a safe Seattle. And I don't think I apologize to anyone for wanting a safe Seattle. That does not mean unreasonable force. That does not mean racism or murder. And quite frankly, it means the opposite. It means effectiveness. And so we will change the culture of the police department. We will examine where a gun and badge goes. But make no mistake about it, at the end of the day, I need everyone to feel safe, and you do not defund as a strategy, as an investment tool to create the outcomes that you want. The outcome that I want is that everyone to feel safe and to know that we're heading in the right direction, that we are on the right trajectory. And under this city council's lead, as one example, they do not have that confidence at all. In fact, they're fearful that they're heading on the wrong trajectory. And I don't think you heard anything in my opponent's speech that would lead you otherwise.
I think I'd know how to unmute that by now. Apologies for that. Can you weigh in on the homeless crisis, and where do you put public safety and homelessness? Those seem to be the two issues that just keep resonating with voters. And, when we're working as journalists, those seem to be, and when it's property owners as well, I mean, we're hearing from them in terms of, I need to run my business and I need to feel safe. We have tourists coming to the city. We just had, a tourist from Portland who was walking by a business in the International Chinatown who was shot in the leg while she was carrying her child. So we are hearing over and over again about public safety, and we're hearing about homelessness as the two big priorities in terms of drivers for voters who, will be voting in November.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So we have to be transparent in this city and open and honest. And there's an intersectionality between the public safety strategies and the homelessness strategies. Now, we all, I think, are pretty compassionate people, and we understand that the face of the homelessness could be someone that a medical bill took them under. It could be mental illness or drug abuse or drug addiction. We understand that. We also understand that there's illicit activity, there's sex trafficking, and there's people preying upon victims who are homeless as well. And so our approach then has to recognize all of the components of the homelessness ecosystem, if you will. And again, I would remind people that my wife was once the president and CEO of United Way. We've been in this space for a number of years. I spent a lifetime in Seattle trying to help people have an equal opportunity to succeed in the city. Our public safety strategies has to reflect the reality that, yes, we do not criminalize poverty, but our core purpose will be to protect people, to enforce the laws as they should be enforced. Now, we will look at every opportunity to save people, every opportunity. Charlene Lyles, for example, who we all know who she was and how she was killed at the hands of police when she was mentally ill, and she had called the police reporting a burglary, and then she had a history of mental illness. She was a pregnant woman with 3 children. She should not die at the hands of a police officer. So what we have to examine is, number one, who should the first responder be? Perhaps we do not need a gun and badge, but equally important is where should they take that person? The public safety strategy is different than a police strategy, because we do not need to take Charlene Lyles to jail. In fact, we don't even need to take her to the hospital where she would be checked out without follow-up case management, intense case management work. So under my approach, we're not only going to look at what first responder goes there, because I don't need a gun and badge, but where will they take Charlene Lyles? We're calling this the safe harbor, and there are sobriety centers, there are types of institutions that will do the kind of case management we want to see. I'm very proud that the firefighters endorsed me, because that epitomizes the kind of first response we want. They are always thinking about where do they take the person for follow-up work. So the intersectionality is there. My approach makes sense because it saves lives and protects people. And at the end of the day, that is our charter responsibility.
I want to ask you something else with regard to the homeless. And this is something I also hear a lot from people. And the question is, what do you do with a person who has refused offers for services and temporary shelter, and they just will not move from where they're camped?
Yeah. So a few things. Number one, statistically, that's still a fraction. That's still about 2%. The data in this city and abroad in our country would suggest it's about 2% of the issue. Most people want housing. Most people want treatment. You know, this is not in the abstract for me. I go to encampments and I talk to people, many of whom I grew up with. You know, I was born and raised in this city. I was born on Capitol Hill. And so for that demographic who could be in denial, I mean, there could be issues of addiction. We have to find out, well, why in the heck would you want to stay in that environment? Perhaps it's because they have a community that they're comfortable around. Perhaps they want a level of autonomy where they can do whatever they want. The fact of the matter is I have to address that on an individual case-by-case management system. Now, I use the term, I said there will be consequences, and all of a sudden I get criticized for that, but there has to be consequences, because make no mistake about that, there are also people in these encampments that are preying upon the other people. They are, and I don't think Seattle or me or anyone should be demonized by looking at the type of demographic that are often in these encampments that are preying upon the other people that are just trying to get on with their life or who need treatment. So the consequences will be done on an individual case-by-case management as well. But I'm going to be candid with you that at the end of the day, we are known for our parks and our green space and our open space, and our children should not have to be denied their right to play in these areas. It's inhumane to let people live in these current conditions. So I'm not numb to it. I haven't become insensitized to it. We have to take action, and you're not seeing that from my opponent. You're not seeing that from City Hall, and I think that's why I do well in this election, because I have a sense of urgency to house these people.
Bruce, thank you. Let's switch gears to a budget, if we would. Oops, I thought I was muted, but I'm not. With a budget of over $8 billion, Seattle's spending per resident is among the very highest of American cities, roughly $8,500 per resident. Why do you suppose it is that Seattle is one of the leaders in spending per resident and yet seemingly unable to solve the largest issues that it's facing?
Yeah, I think there's a few things kicking in here, and this is coming from a person that's been in the city his entire life. The number one, I don't think we are nearly as transparent with our data. We're opening up so everyone could see. Under my plan, you'll see cost per person, cost per unit. You'll see a map of where the encampments are and the milestones and where we are will achieve with our strategy. So I don't think we're being nearly as transparent as we should be. And I believe that we are a compassionate city, and sometimes our policies of tolerance skew our ability to actually solve the problem. And so I'm hopeful that we tap into all of the bench strength out there, which is our people and our companies, small and large. And we allow a portal by which they can donate resources, talent, food, shirts off their back, resume assistance. And that as the leader and the executive of the city, I will open up that portal and make it accessible. We are inefficient as a city government. That is just the truth of the matter. And so I have to open up the data. I did that for City Light, by the way. When we were looking at how rates were set, and that put some politicians out of business, I said, well, wait a minute. I don't particularly have the skill set on this council to set rates. I opened up the books and I let Boeing and Nucor, who pays $1 million a month on their power bill, have access to the same information the mayor has and the city council has, allocation of costs, expenses. And then I made sure our climate change experts and our neighborhood advocates and our low income advocates had access to the same information. You open up the books and then good policies are developed. So we're going to do the same thing on our homeless strategy. So you'll see an open book policy. So the city will scrutinize on how well we are spending tax dollars. And I think we could be much more efficient.
Where do you think we are in downtown Seattle with regard to recovery? And what are the first steps that you would take to accelerate its recovery, restore its vibrancy and its welcoming attitude?
Well, the first thing under my public safety strategy, we have to realize that everything is layered upon public safety. It has to be safe. And the second very close first cousin of that is cleanliness in terms of litter and graffiti. I mean, I grew up in this city and I got to tell you, it's awful. I mean, let's just be honest. These are intolerable conditions. So not only do I have to make it safe and make it clean, whether it's new paint and graffiti removal, and we have some strategies there, we build on that. And so then I have to do a visioning exercise with you neighborhood advocates down there, civic leaders, urbanists. And I want to see activated areas. I want it safe. I want open space. I want tree canopy. I want to see daycare centers. I want to see an educational school downtown. But it's not so much what I want, is that I open up a portal again, open up a forum by which you all can help me build this and vision it out. So we're going to do a visioning exercise as we build our layers of cleanliness and safety. The new downtown will be a new downtown because I will tell you that the brick and mortar institutions many of them were on thin margins even before COVID hit because of e-commerce. And so we have to be sober enough to figure out when we tie in our downtown to the waterfront and to the market, I think we have an incredible opportunity here. But it won't be the same. But it has to start with, again, cleanliness and public safety.
What are you going to tell business owners? I mean, it's been a rough 2 years, right? I mean, and what's the city gonna do for them, and what has the city done lately?
Yeah. So what I tell business owners is probably less important than what I listen to. And I've toured business owners downtown and Belltown. I've taken tours through the University District and West Seattle, all throughout the city. And what they're telling me is they need a few things: public safety, access to capital. And so we will have a lending strategy, perhaps below market rate interest loans, using community development financial institutions or community block grant organizations. They want a looser regulatory structure such that they can use the built environment, such as outdoor seating and other types of novel approaches to get out of their way and let them do their thing. So, and you're also going to want a contact in the city by which they can get their needs met. I talk about an account system such that they have a go-to person in our Office of Economic Development. You may recall at the forum, we talked about helping small businesses, and I talked about using the Office of Economic Development as a strategy, and my opponent talked about the Office of Labor Standards, which is a workers' rights forum, but they don't create jobs or help small businesses in that regard. They help to train them on workers' rights. That's important work too. But with small businesses, I have to convince them that the city is a partner. So we'll assign them accounts in the Office of Economic Development and figure out what their needs are and then meet them.
Well, let me back up. I did want to ask you, sort of in that line of questioning, what kind of public-private alliances do you see if you become elected as mayor, and how prepared are you to build them, and how would you build them?
So that will be of critical importance in our city. And that probably is one of many distinctions between my opponent's platform and myself. You know, I don't demonize businesses, small, medium, or large. I want their jobs here. I want their tax revenues here. I want their core competencies here. We built a great city on our maritime port and industry and manufacturing base, and we grew high tech and biotech, a great university system. That's our secret sauce, that we have a very diverse economy. And what I tell them is, now I need you, particularly the large businesses, to align your CSR strategies, corporate social responsibility strategies, in housing and affordability, in homelessness, in education. A lot of these large wealthy corporations, for example, I'll give you a specific example. Tableau was acquired by Salesforce. They're based here. Their largest corporate social responsibility efforts are around race and social justice. And so they want to be in that space. I want to use their expertise. Now I could use strategic planners, those who could develop code, those could use social media, and I could use that rich talent base to help work with nonprofits in this particular space. So I'm interested in solving homelessness. Let's be unambiguous about that. So when I talk to companies like Microsoft or Amazon, I have to have their corporate social responsibilities lined up with our core needs as a city. And I have to work with them collaboratively. And quite frankly, and quite candidly, I do that well. I have the relationship capital. And so when my opponent talks about he's supported by all these people, well, I'm supported by the NAACP and the Urban League and the Table 100 and nonprofit and social justice warriors in the city. But they all want the same thing. They want a place where we can thrive once again, and they're tired of the double talk and the unclear messaging coming out of City Hall. So we will work collaboratively with them, and I say that unashamedly.
Would you be willing, Bruce, to meet quarterly with local business leaders from Seattle's neighborhoods, such as Belltown, to discuss timely issues, but more importantly, to agree to actionable activities?
Yes, I'll be willing to meet quarterly, and I take feedback. I mean, I spoke to a group today. This is, hey, I got some good news. This is my last forum for the evening, because I've had about 6 of them today.
And guess what? You've got 1 minute left.
I have 1 minute left. I will come back if elected, and I'll say, well, how well are we doing? You know, feedback is not definition, it's feedback. So I want people on this forum and people in these communities, in these neighborhoods, to say, you know what, we're doing a great job. You are heading in the right direction. I trust you. I believe in your vision, and I'm seeing this with you. So yes, I'd be willing to meet quarterly, and I look forward to it. I actually get energized by that.
I appreciate that. And I want to give you 30 more seconds. If you could do this in 30 seconds, I really want to hear the answer. What do you see as the critical votable difference between your platform and promises and your vision of Seattle compared to your opponent? And that'll be your final answer. Well,
you know, I heard her denigrating me when I got on. I don't spend much time looking at that platform. I don't fully understand it, quite honestly. I just stay in my lane. I know what I want. I don't see why I continue to get hammered by who seems to support me, because I got people from all walks of life supporting me. The difference, I suppose, will be that I have a sense of urgency. I'm not afraid to make the tough decisions. I want everyone to feel safe. I don't listen to just the loudest voice in the room, because that voice could be wrong. I want to work collaboratively with neighborhoods. I believe in these people. I mean, the fact is, the city advanced 2 people of color to the primary. We should be proud of that as a city. I believe we are liberal and compassionate. My job will be to bring out the best in the city, not to castigate people and denigrate them. That is my job. Not only come up with the best policies and right investments to bring us a better day. And I think I'm uniquely qualified for that, given my life story here in Seattle. And so I'd be absolutely honored if you all could go to my website and support me. I'd be honored. And I think it's our time to get our city back on the right track, and we'll do a course correction.
Bruce Harrell, thank you for your time and your input and your patience with us. I appreciate it, especially me with that mute button. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank all of you for building community. I appreciate it very much.
And I'll just remind everybody, if you are joining us and you're not one of our speakers, if you would so please kindly mute your microphone. That's so helpful. So thank you for that in advance. I want to bring in Ken Wilson now, who is running for an at-large position, P8. Of course, at-large that means citywide. Ken Wilson is joining us now. He's lived in Seattle for over 28 years. This is his first run for elective office. He is a newcomer. Ken earned degrees from the University of Nevada and the University of Washington. He's a licensed civil engineer, and since 2005, the owner of an engineering consulting firm. He is married and the father of 2 daughters, and we understand a part-time soccer coach, and he has an affinity, I can tell you, for bridges. Good evening, Ken.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me here.
Absolutely. We're just going to launch right into it. We're giving everybody about 5 minutes for this first question, and then we'll try to get in as many others as we can. I'll just remind you that Belltown, like many Seattle neighborhoods, we know has a public safety concern, property crime, assaults, homelessness, theft, vandalism, assaults, you name it. And really, as a journalist, I hear it all the time, particularly when I'm in the city, that people are frustrated, they want more done. So what would you do to break through the impasse? How would you galvanize people and move them forward? And we're specifically asking, as we've asked all the candidates, about law enforcement and crime prevention, as well as social services and urban planning and all of that, of course. How do you balance all of that? It's hard to get your arms around all of that, but we got to do it to create a better life in Belltown.
So yeah, I think Belltown, especially now, has been really challenged. You can see there's a lot of focused activity that it's kind of just built up over time. And so I would really love to see a chance to re-support our police, actually try and build back a staff, support the existing police that are here, give them the tools that they need, the training that they need to de-escalate and actually better engage with this community, give them time. A lot of the police have to respond to every emergency. And so that really brings a lot of pressure on them as individuals. They are individuals too. And so having rotations where we actually have them walk the neighborhood or engage in actually positive interactions with the neighborhoods would be really great to try and build back this police presence in that area. This area in particular, it seems like we're focusing a lot of our challenges with the homeless and mental challenges, addictions, but they shouldn't, there's not hospitals there. So it doesn't really make sense. Sometimes on First Hill, we do have some of this focus, and that makes sense because there's facilities available to us. So we have to actually build out a city where we can actually connect the parts. And so you may have seen where, and I've talked with about this, using what's going on at Northgate. So we have a metro transit center that now is becoming obsolete, and we're moving those buses to the train station. Beautiful train station we just built at Northgate. That gets us that light rail connection. The main idea is that we now have this access to a property that's really valuable. You could hand it to developers, and I know many have asked so that they could use it as low income housing, or at least give you a subsidized housing, but that's not advantage to our community. We actually need to build an asset. We know this homeless challenge is a problem, and we know it's not going away, and we know it takes a long time. The ideas of moving them to a tiny house is really just moving them. It's changing the facility, but not giving them that path to graduate forward. So I'm looking to try and use that property, use this amazing amount of money we're getting at federal level, and try and build a real facility. You could build it modularly, just as I did the bridge. We built that down in Tacoma area, put it on trucks and brought it here. You can actually build things quicker by doing multiple systems and putting them together. It gives you a big head start on timing. But here we can have social services, and it takes the focus away from the areas like Belltown and First Hill, Pioneer Square, that are seeing a lot more of this challenging issues, and give them a chance to get the social services they need, get a duration that they can build out of, 18 to 24 months to give a real transition. That first year, it may be that the best you can do is really just get out of your addictions and get out of the mental challenges. No, you can't even try and attempt to have a job. So there's a lot of things that have to happen. The downtown, we have to have police. We have to enforce the laws. So how do we get the police back? Right now, you saw and we talk about it, it's in the Seattle Times, 260 police have left, and someone will say, no, they're not left. Or in reality, it's more than that. Many are on administrative leave, or they're just holding on their time, their sick leave, until they're gone. I've talked with police officers. I talked with the president of the guild. I've talked with retired 911 folks, King County sheriffs. These are real people that are interacting and know what their friends are feeling right now. They're not welcome. They don't have a relationship between our county, our city council, and our police. And so we need to really build that back, build up our police, get safety first. Now the businesses have an opportunity to actually do something. So there's a lot of things going on. I want to focus that work, get us back to a police system that can work, try and reinstitute, build back those police that we have, and also start making a facility that is a real long-term transition facility, not one that's outreach and tiny houses, one that actually works. But we also have to go back to accountability. We've been throwing lots of money at things for a long time. And so I would love to see a chance where we can see if things aren't working, that we make this adjustment. And that's what I do even on my own life or in my own bridge projects. When this system is not giving us the cost points that we need, then we need to actually change and build our facility out of a different material or look into different suppliers. So there's always steps where you have a plan, you initiate based on identified problems, you have a plan, you implement it. Now let's go back and see how it's working. Give us a chance to verify it's going on target.
I just wanted to mention, I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you. I don't know if anybody else is as well.
I'm really
Yeah,
sorry
I think
about
that microphone, we can get a little closer to your mouth. That would be helpful.
Yeah.
We could hear you though throughout. It was just a little challenging at times. You talk about all of these things, all of these issues that are important and what we need to do. But of course, you know, there's got to be consensus, and there obviously are many different opinions and situations of discord. So, you know, but action still has to be taken. So how does that happen if you get elected on this council?
Yeah, I think that's very true, but still having a voice that begins with an understanding that it's not right to have this amazing increase in the number of shootings. It's not right to have this amazing change in how crime and property crimes are happening. A lot of it may seem like basic nuisance. Oh, it's just graffiti. No, each of these escalate, and allowing the homeless challenge to stay at the side of the road is actually turning into criminal activity as well. So I think it's about building this consensus, as you say, on a council to demonstrate, hey, we know something's wrong and here's the answers to what's going on. So we do have to build back a relationship with that police department, help them be successful and do better, help them keep their staff. There's a lot of money invested in every single officer. We see 260 officers and we say, oh, we'll just go get some off the shelf. No, they have to go through officer training school. There's $80,000 worth of pay and training to get them through school and all these months of training before they can even be brought on. So when we pay for the training of those facilities, those police officers, and they leave, some other local municipality gets that big benefit, but we have to start from scratch. How do you attract an officer to a very challenging situation where their boss, the one that holds their budget, the city of Seattle, has forced out Chief Best, who was doing all this work and brought herself up from the bottom? How can you demonstrate to them that no, we're going to change, we're going to support? So you have to make a stop at the council here and make someone like me that's ready to make this change and absolutely connect with the police better. So I know it's about building consensus, and that's part of this process. It really has to happen.
I'm going to throw just an extra question in here, because I think there's probably some people that are wondering this. You know, after the primary, we heard Kenneth Miller.
Kenneth Miller? Wilson?
Or Wilson, excuse me. Kenneth Wilson.
Oh,
I
darn.
apologize.
Another one. There was 11 was enough, wasn't it? Come
There
on.
you go. There you go. I apologize, Kenneth. But bridge engineer, civil engineer, how did you get here? Let's talk about like what motivated you to run for council.
Yeah, I've been a 28-year resident, and like many of the people here in the city, and I'm going around, I'm meeting with people who are amazingly supportive of me, and they all have this feeling that something is just really wrong with the city, and that was the same for me. But the initial straw, or the one straw that really pushed it over the limit, was seeing this West Seattle Bridge. So that was very important to me, that we have a major piece of our infrastructure. And you look at our city, and each of these important areas are all connected with bridges and with facilities. And so to see this challenge happen was enough that kind of pushed me into the race. But there were so many other issues as well. Even our daughter's in track, and so she can't run track around Green Lake, you know, because of the homeless challenges there. So there's a lot of things that are going on and needed a change, and that really made me step out. It's time to take that huge cut in pay and put the business kind of in a coaster mode, hire someone to help me, and then move on and try and make this big change that's necessary at the city.
Well, you know, we're asking all the candidates the same questions, and I want to ask you another one of those, and that is just, why do you think it is that Seattle is one of the leaders in spending per resident, and yet seemingly unable to solve the large issues? I have a feeling you might want to talk about, you know, how you would measure performance of each department and hold them accountable with regard to resident tax dollars.
Yeah, and I did see that you, at least when I had seen one of the questions asked about this comparison to Boston as another major metropolis. And so I think that it's nice to have these measures to measure against other cities and see what we do. So that really is good value. That's the way that you understand, hey, am I getting this right, or are they getting it better, or what's going on? So I do think it's a good idea to start with measures like that. That's not a bad thing. There is some differences between other cities. Our city may have a different set of challenges for our bridges. We might have a big enough square foot area, at least compared to Boston, that we probably have more roads than what they're using. So there are some differences that you could take in, some maybe standard deviation, but in reality, what's asked in this question is absolutely right. We are way at the top for spending. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Part of it has to do with how we account for what's happening. Our means of checking and verifying that we've actually gotten a return for the money. What did we do with the money? What did we achieve? We keep doing measures that come to the ballot. Hey, I want new parks. I want new parks too. So what happened to the money? Well, we didn't do anything with it. So there's something wrong with how we're allowing the challenges to continue to ask and ask for more money, and we sign off. We're doing our part to give that tax revenue to try and make it happen, but it's not being spent correctly. So I think it's about us asking them to be accountable, asking our council to come back to us in groups. We have so many great individual facilities within this community. There's, you know, where I was over in Ballard, and I was just in West Seattle. And so these are chances that your council could come back to you and hear without, you know, planned questions that have to be numbered, or, oh, you have to turn in writing. A lot of times the questions come when you need it. So I want to come back to getting a chance to interact with the people, show them that we're doing work, show them that we're actually making the changes and efficient use of their money. And you can demonstrate this even in the annual reporting, how it does with graphics and characteristic items, that how are we doing on specifically on bridges. So you saw we have this amazing challenge on West Seattle Bridge, but we have so many other bridges. So what's going on? We have a means of already mapping the outlay of costs for each of these items, and its function, it's actually sent to our federal level. So we should be doing something similar with all our facilities.
Economically, Seattle, like every city across the country, has really taken a hit. Let's talk about recovery. One of the things that I hear from businesses is they want to make sure the next mayor, the next Seattle city council person has a plan. So what is your plan for recovery?
Yeah, my plan for recovery has to begin with the safety issues. Our problems with businesses, they don't want to invest in an area that they have instability in taxes. They're not sure if there's going to have problems there. There's instability for employees. They can't find employees. And we also have instabilities even in the rental situation or ownership. So when we keep changing our rental laws, when we keep changing what's expected of us for taxes, these are actually drivers that are making instabilities and giving people a choice. So for instance, in Belltown, my wife is part of an incubator in a biotech company down in Fremont. Her boss was renting a condo down there, but he left. He went over to Bellevue, not because Bellevue's a better city or a better area, but because there's real challenges that have to be dealt with, and they're not. We keep giving more money without the benefits of it. So for our plan, it has to have something that's actually starting with getting the safety in line, giving these businesses the real opportunity by not adding more tax and more regulation, and giving them a chance where the city is going to be receptive to them. All our words that come out of the council talk about words about how we need to tax these companies more. I don't think that's true at all. And I think our last question got right to the heart of it. Compared to every other city, we're spending more. So what's going on?
Well, what do
So
you
it's
say to
really
people-
about getting us back to normal and normalizing so that other companies will come back.
Well, what do you say to the argument that these big corporations need to be paying their fair share? They can afford it. I mean, and when
It's-
you look at the taxing system.
Well, I hear it, but I do not say that's correct. So I think what the main statement of that is that first off, you're stating that first the companies are not paying taxes. So they do generate taxes through the employees and the people that they bring here. But also right now, think about how we even saw what Amazon did with their incentivizing themselves. They said, all right, we're going to make another headquarters. Who's going to pay us to go there? So that's the kind of situation we are. If we're looking to chase after the big companies, Boeing, which left, and many of these others, Amazon, which is trying their best to leave, you're going to lose them. So it's not about trying to find them and make them pay what we're seeing as a fair share. We have to work with them and say, all right, what's going on here? I have real issues. I will fix them. And you'll love to be here in this city. And they'll say, yeah, okay, I can accept that. Here, let's see you do something. And then I'll start adding to the kitty to make it work out. So it's really about us demonstrating. And these companies have no incentive to actually stay, or they're getting damaged by our mistakes that we're doing with our money too. So I don't think it's about taxing them more to get them to stay.
Lastly, let's see how much time we have left here. We just have a couple of minutes. I'm asking everybody to end on this question, and that is, what do you see as your critical votable difference between your platform and promises and your vision of Seattle compared to your opponent?
There's many things. So I would start with protecting our neighborhoods. Right now, you're seeing a lot of changes around zoning trying to happen. And you can look at my website and you'll see that zoning is not, it's a function thing. This is about how our one-way streets, even outside my street in Wallingford, it won't work if you actually suddenly change the zoning. The sewers don't work and you have to rebuy them to the 100-year-old sewer that's in front of my house. So everything starts compounding. Who's going to pay that? The developer has already left. So upzoning and protecting our neighborhoods is a fundamental difference for us. The tree canopy, that's an issue that has been available to all this council for so long, but they've overstepped it forever. Maybe they'll talk about it today because I talk about it, but there's means that we can actually develop but intelligently hold this protection of our critical tree canopy. So also managing our infrastructure, there's a difference there. Again, under all this, she's in charge of budget, and yet we see no beneficial budget for all the bridges they're going. Instead, they're going to ask you for more money. I would say that there's money, we just need to figure out how to do it and use it more appropriately. So then back to safety, a safety element that we've watched where safety has been allowed to continue, homelessness has been allowed to continue, and those are issues that I would absolutely differ on and jump right in to try and make real impacts on.
Ken Wilson, not Ken Miller. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me this evening. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely, I appreciate it. All right, let's bring in your opponent for position 8, and that is Council Member Teresa Mosqueda. Teresa grew up in the Pacific Northwest and is a third-generation Mexican-American. She was elected to Seattle City Council in 2017. She'll talk a lot about those democracy vouchers. Prior to the City Council, she worked at Washington Affordable Care Act Exchange, Children's Alliance, and the Washington State Labor Council. And Teresa has degrees from the University of Washington and Evergreen State College. She is married and the mother of a baby, a daughter. Good evening and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate you being here and for everyone who stayed till this time.
Yeah, I wanted to give a big shout out to everybody too, because we're honing in on 2 hours here. once we clock this last 20 minutes, but thank you for your patience. And you are our last candidate for the night. And as you know, we've been asking everybody essentially the same questions, and sometimes we dive off a little bit. But let's go back to the very beginning, and that is really hyper-focused on Belltown to start with. And many neighborhoods in Seattle, as you know, have been dealing with public safety issues. So we want to talk about that and what many feel is a lack of progress. We need to be doing better on public safety. We need to be better on homelessness. How would you break through the impasse? What would you do with regard to law enforcement, non-enforcement, crime prevention, as well as social services and urban planning? I know I've been telling everybody it's kind of a lot to create a better quality of life. You get to go wherever you want, but we want to throw all those things out there because we'd love to hear a little bit about each of those if possible.
Thanks so much. Well, I want to thank everybody for the opportunity to join you tonight. Thank you to the Belltown community. I did have the chance to meet a few times with folks who were part of the Humans of Belltown. This was pre-COVID when we had the chance to really get out in community and see folks face to face. I also had the opportunity to do a walkthrough with members of the Belltown community. We coordinated through my office the ability to pull together Seattle Police Department, Seattle City Light, Seattle Parks, Department of Neighborhoods, and a few other departments to walk through the neighborhood and see some of the issues that many small businesses were raising and community residents as well in the neighborhood. Issues from the need for additional lighting across the Belltown community, the need for trees to be cut back so that existing lighting was present, the need for curb cuts to be enhanced or to be modified to slow down traffic so that it was safer for communities to walk around. And especially during COVID, the need to make sure that more of our residents who are living unsheltered had a place to call home. I want to also note and appreciate how much Belltown as a community has stepped up and has provided critical services, especially to unsheltered women with the women's shelter system that is housed within the Belltown community. We know that when folks have access to shelter, when they have access to mental health and case management systems, when there's a safe place to go home, people are able to get stabilized and moved into affordable housing. I will continue to work to make sure that we are building affordable housing so that more people can move out of the shelter, like the women's shelter in Belltown, that more people who are living on the street can then move into those shelter options, and that we're creating safe places for folks to live that are not on the streets or in our doorways for communities, for community and small businesses. We know that we have some very prosperous community companies that are right here making their home in Seattle. We want to welcome those companies. And we also want to make sure that our smallest companies and our largest companies don't have folks who are living outside, because that is a visible sign of the income inequality that has just grown in Seattle. We can do better. And I'm proud to have passed progressive revenue in my first term here that invests 2/3 of that funding directly into building affordable housing. The other third goes into economic resilience, equitable development, and Green New Deal initiatives. And so when I look at Belltown and I see the nexus to other areas around our city, including South Lake Union, downtown, my old neighborhood of Queen Anne and uptown there, we know how important the Belltown community is and how essential it is that both residents and small businesses have protections. And that means making us have protections and feel like everyone is safe. And that means making sure everyone has a safe place to call home, that small businesses have support, and that we're doing a better job of creating lighting and cleaning up our neighborhood so that community feels safe. And I would just also note, if I have a quick second, I know, Michelle, I'm used to being timed, so please cut me off if I need to be cut off.
I should have told you that I'm giving 5 minutes to everybody for that.
Oh,
first
okay.
one, because it is so long.
It's very generous. Yeah, thank you.
So you've got like 2 more minutes.
Okay.
And if you don't use it, that's okay. We'll use it somewhere else.
Well, this is a thank you again for this time, and I'll note the connections that I've tried to make with folks who have maybe differing opinions or you wouldn't think that I reach out to. I have called the folks at Downtown Seattle Association. I've talked to folks at the Chamber of Commerce. I meet with people who have varying degrees of overlap in terms of where I have priority policies and where folks might not see agreement on a daily basis, or you might not assume it. I've reached out to communities, especially our business leaders, to ask, how can we be doing a better job? What is it that is that we need to be doing? And especially especially as I've been trying to stand up more hotels, more tiny houses, and supporting the HOPE team response. What I have heard from small business leaders especially is our previous system does not work. The navigation team tied to police enforcement is only moving people around. Something different has to happen. What I have tried to do in my first 4 years is come together to offer that something different. We created the HOPE team so that there was mental health counselors and case managers who are going out and having those initial conversations with folks to get more people inside. We worked very hard after COVID hit our community to encourage the mayor and the executive team to open up hotels across our city so that more people could come inside, especially because the mat on the floor shelters were closing. Those congregate shelter options were leaving people without a place to go. We needed to open up hotels and get folks inside. And I had a lot of hoteliers, including small business hoteliers in the downtown corridor, who said, that's actually going to be a good thing for me. I'm losing revenue right now. And if we can create a partnership, you can get folks housed, I can get sustained through this crisis, that'll be a good thing. And what I'll continue to do is to make sure that more people have emergency shelter solutions. And we are going to build those affordable housing units. Up to 4,000 affordable housing units are going to be built every year thanks to Jumpstart Progressive Revenue. And that is only on our largest companies, over 7 million in Seattle payroll, and only on the highest salaries, over 150,000. We have that tax implemented. And at the same time, we see incredible startups coming to Seattle and growing here. We had a record number of startups or unicorns in the startup industry that had record profits compared to other cities. That means more people are coming here. They see this as a good place to live. They want to be part of our entrepreneurial climate out here in Seattle. And I think along with that, they recognize that these higher salaries are causing greater housing instability. So working together, we can solve this problem. That's what Seattle Tech for Housing, for example, is doing, saying we're from the tech industry and we know that we need greater solutions so that more folks can afford to stay, live, and thrive in Seattle. And I think that that is what you'll see from me, someone who continues to bring people together to find solutions to these pressing crises and not pit against each other.
I want to jump back to the navigation team for just a minute, because that was, led by police and then replaced by the HOPE team. What sort of, I can't recall how long the HOPE team's been in place, but I think it's been in place long enough, perhaps, for council to have done some analysis. I mean, what do we know? What have we learned from it? Do we adjust it? Is it working?
So the HOPE team has been in effect for approximately 12 months. We have been now in November, it will be 12 months since the council passed it. It has not been a full calendar year since the funding has been applied. So what you can see is that we've created opportunity to lead with case managers, lead with community entities that have greater trust. And that trust is being partnered with the REACH and the LEAD teams. So the law enforcement diversion programs, the REACH outreach folks that have been getting folks into hotels have been incredibly successful. The concern, though, is that you see greater numbers of individuals actually falling into homelessness during this time. And because so many of our shelters that were prior to COVID providing acute care to those who have extreme high mental health and behavioral health issues, some of those facilities closed. Because of the congregate nature of COVID, they had to close. And instead of offering them additional shelter in the city, some shelter was offered outside of the city. That created a lot of instability, especially for folks who have high behavioral health needs and mental health needs. I don't think we have opened up those low barrier, high needs services fast enough. I know you're going to see that as a priority for us in this budget. But what we know is that when that trust happens and people see an outreach person coming to them, and we lead with case management and compassion, we're more successful at getting folks inside. The problem is we don't have enough shelter and housing to get folks into. So the relationships have been successful, but we haven't successfully opened up enough shelters to keep up with the demand, especially under COVID, when so many shelters have had to downsize due to the nature of congregate shelters being problematic, especially according to the CDC's own guidance, needing to create individual rooms. We just didn't scale it up fast enough. And I think that that's been a valid point of criticism. It is something that I have tried to work with the mayor's office to open up more hotels and tiny houses. We are seeing some of those come online, but we need to do more, especially with the wave of Delta coming. And I actually think, and Councilmember Bagshaw, who represented Belltown for so long and is a friend of mine and endorser as well, Councilmember Bagshaw and I, when she served on council for my first 2 years, we kept saying, mat on the floor options are not working. We're separating families. We're removing parents from kiddos. Often the dad couldn't stay with the kiddo and the mom because of these congregate shelters. This was not a sustainable model before. So if anything, in the wake of COVID, as we think about rooms and doors and roofs and ways to help house folks in a more holistic way, keeping families together, I am hopeful that as we open up more of these non-congregate shelters, it's actually going to be a more sustainable way to get people inside. 47% of the people, for example, who have been living in tiny house villages are being placed into permanent supportive housing. That's compared to like 10 to 15% of the mat on the floor shelter options that existed before COVID. What we're investing in works. We need to just do more of it.
Now we know Jumpstart money comes next year, $135 million. And how many units is that going to provide? And is that going to be enough?
Yes, thank you for flagging that. So Jumpstart progressive revenue means that the largest companies with the largest salaries begin paying a small assessment. Again, I want to thank the large coalition that came together, which included large businesses as well. Friends from Expedia and Ethan Stoll, along with labor and housing. This is a broad coalition that came up with a very thoughtful and narrow proposal. We're going to see over $235 million a year start to come into the city of Seattle. 2/3 of that, so about $135 million a year, will go into building affordable housing. That is a conservative estimate. In fact, that was based on bringing in about 214 initially. So we're already seeing a potential uptake from the projections. But if you look at the amount of housing that could be built each year, you're right. It's going to create 3,900 units every year on the conservative estimate front. Is that enough? No, it's not enough to serve the thousands of folks who are living unsheltered. And I would say the thousands who are, one paycheck away from potentially falling into homelessness or not being able to pay their rent. I also don't think that it's going to be enough for the future years when we're going to see more folks come here, more entrepreneurs, more people who want to come here for these good living wage jobs, more people, frankly, who are coming here as climate refugees, immigrants and refugees, people who want to come to Seattle because this is going to be a safe place and a welcoming place to be. So I'm going to continue to work to build more housing, but at the very least, this Jumpstart proposal is going to create around 4,000 new units a year. That, coupled with what the county is doing and our regional homelessness investment, which Councilmember Bagshaw and I worked very hard to pass as well. Our regional homelessness system, coupled with long-term permanent supportive housing, I think is the winning formula to helping get folks stabilized.
Okay, one more question, and then we'll move on. But I want to know about the Regional Housing Authority, because you're talking county and then you're talking city, and how do we know that that money is going to be equally distributed? I mean, in terms of like accountability and just balancing that and tracking it, I guess.
So you are hitting the nail on the head in terms of what I am most interested in as the budget chair. Currently, we're slated to provide about 55% of the investments into the Regional Homelessness Authority, and the county picks up about 45%. We are the only two funders towards this Regional Homelessness Authority currently. A lot of our sound cities or the regional cities here who we had hoped would be paying into this system are not currently. So the city of Seattle and King County Council and the executive are the ones who are going to be paying in. There is a proposal from the Regional Homelessness Authority that if it were fully funded, the city of Seattle would be paying around 71% of the total investments for the first year of the Regional Homelessness Authority. I know that the city of Seattle has about 70% of the homeless population in the county, but I also want to make sure that the resources that we're putting into the Regional Homelessness Authority are concentrated on providing care to those who are also living in Seattle. So I would like to make sure that we have accountability, that when dollars are going in, of course, we want to have economies of scale. We want to help support regional cities. We want to help address homelessness across the city, because housing instability and homelessness really does not have any borders. When you are trying to find shelter or you're trying to find services and housing, it doesn't matter if you are just over the line in Seattle. We want to make sure folks are stably housed in this region, but we're going to need to have some assurances that the dollars that we are putting in as a city are really going into serving those who are here. And the concept is, if they're not going into directly into Seattle, are we creating greater stability so that those who are facing homelessness or housing insecurity don't end up coming just to Seattle because we're the only ones offering care. Care needs to be offered across our region and frankly, across our state and country.
All right, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Okay, I've got 2 more questions and only 4 minutes left. So
Okay, I'll try to be short.
Okay, 2 minutes each. If you're like me, I'm long-winded, but you have things to say, and oftentimes I don't. So there we go. With 45,000 employees, dozens of political leaders, department heads, and citizens-led commissions within the city, there are obviously many differing opinions and situations of discord, but decisions still must be made and action still must be taken. Describe how you would lead and your management style if elected. And again, I'm getting at this, the differing opinions, particularly between the city council and the mayor. And so let's talk about the fact that decisions still have to be made. You're muted.
Okay, thank you so much for that question. I think the folks who have been able to see me in office, and then prior to that, when I was with the Washington State Labor Council, when I was with the Children's Alliance, when I worked in public health, people know me as a coalition builder. I am both progressive and effective, meaning I know how to pull together diverse coalitions, including people who I might not agree with on a daily basis on policy, but try to find that common ground so we have sustainable, workable policies that help move towards progressive and effective solutions. I have done this when we created Jumpstart Progressive Revenue. I did this when we passed hotel worker protections and domestic workers Bill of Rights, which got national attention because we worked with the employers as well. And we still had the most progressive domestic worker protections. I've done this working on housing solutions, and prior to my work when I was with the Labor Council and fighting for healthcare for everyone at the Children's Alliance and the State Labor Council. I think that the reason that you see endorsements from everyone from U.S. Representative, our congressional member, Representative Jayapal and Bernie Sanders, to former mayors like Charlie Royer and Mayor Mike McGinn, people see that I know the importance of working within the legislative branch, understanding the council role, and also working with the executive, working with the mayor's office, working with our state legislative partners and our federal delegation. That is why I have endorsements from every single legislative district Democrat organization, King County Dems, and folks from the county as well, who have seen me in action and know how to find solutions. So I'll continue to do that to address these most pressing problems. That's what folks want to see right now. Somebody who knows how to work with people, who has the relationships and will actively make sure that dollars are getting deployed to our city.
After this discussion today, what do you see as the critical votable differences between you and your opponent? Final question.
I think that I have community-driven solutions, broad coalition support. Every environmental activist group, Washington Conservation Voters, Sierra Club, 350 Seattle has endorsed me. Every single labor union in Seattle has endorsed me. Women's health groups have endorsed me. Elder and kiddo advocates have endorsed me because they know that I am somebody who will deliver on progressive commitments and center public policies on what is good for the public's health. Right now in this crisis, there's nothing more important than our population's health. And that means making sure we're prioritizing affordable housing, health and hygiene and sanitation for everyone in this city, and allowing opportunities for small businesses and affordable housing to flourish in Seattle so that we all have a place to call home. You cannot stay home if you cannot stay healthy if you don't have a home right now, and you cannot stay healthy if you don't have economic security. That is what I'm committed to, and I know how to deliver on those.
Teresa Mosqueda, thank you very much. You've kept us right on time. It is 8 o'clock. I want to say thank you to all of our candidates. This has been very helpful and interesting. It's really been fun for me as well. It's just so great to have a conversation and be a little more relaxed and just hear one-on-one from the candidates. So Teresa, thank you very much for being last and hanging in there tonight. And a big shout out to Belltown United, all of the participants that are here tonight. Thank you for joining us. You know, anytime we're talking, we're thinking, we're using our brains. I think that's a good thing. I love the fact that I get a lot of people as a journalist asking me, you know, what do I think? And I say, watch these types of forums, watch these debates, go to all the candidates' websites. They've all worked really hard on their websites, check them out, and watch as many of these events as you can, because it will really help educate you to make a good decision come November. And with that, I want to say thank you and don't forget to vote. Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Belltown.
Thank you.